this is frustrating for me. I've never done this part of the job before, and I always want to talk about the stuff that we're talking about, and I can't. I'm up here like biting my tongue. I apologize. But with that, I'd like to bring up Greg Adgate from Equinix and Steve Anson from Anixter. They're going to talk to us about key trends and best practices in edge data center environments. Thanks.
Cheers, thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Afternoon already. Running a little bit late, so we're going to have a quick fire, rapid response here. I have the opportunity as responsible for vertical markets at Anixter, and also have an opportunity now to be the journalist and interview Greg Adgate from Equinix, who's responsible for VP of Global Channels and Alliances. They happen to be a very large global customer of ours. And as it relates to edge computing and the whole edge data center solutions, it's very important to Anixter as it relates to the physical infrastructure, anywhere from the connectivity, the security, power cooling solutions, et cetera. So we heard this morning 2 presentations that started talking about the definition of what edge is and what is edge to you and your facilities. So lots of more definitions here. A data center that houses an edge computing equipment. Makes sense from Data Foundry, from Data Center Knowledge. A data center that connects 80% of the internet content with 50% of broadband users in a metro area. And from Data Center Dynamics, a data center that has proximity to the user base. So lots of complementary conversations earlier. So Greg, as we have grown over the last 10, 15 years in the data center space from the enterprise moving off-prem, and then we start looking at the carrier space, the points of presence, the micro DCs, from the lens of a co-location organization, how does the edge data center play for you?
I think the convergence of the carrier POP, I'll say cloud edge, and ISPs coming together, they're kind of merged. We see, as a colo provider ourselves, that in our ecosystem, you have clouds, you have networks, you have digital platforms all coming together, and they are distributed around different parts of the globe to be closer to end users so that experience can be faster. So those middle 3 visuals are actually one big circle in our world. We're providing colo to carriers and cloud providers. And then because of that and what's going on with enterprise transformation, as they modernize apps and infrastructure, they're starting to move certain things into public cloud across networks, where you have some stuff on-prem and some stuff living in that big middle piece. And then the micro data centers, I learned a lot in the first session of a real use case that is going on. Our experience with it is probably more around aggregating the data coming off of sensors through those connected colo facilities so that the data can be processed and analyzed into an analytics platform in cloud or stored and moved around across the network. So we actually are investing, Equinix is anyway, in micro data center research to see whether or not we're going to have a play. So more to come on that out of our strategic initiatives team.
Right, so interesting the definition of the edge being that demarcation point of the cell tower from the LinkedIn gentleman. So do you agree with that?
Or the device from Todd.
Okay.
He's saying the actual device that's connecting to the cell tower that's connecting to. That difference is, I think, why you laid this out. What is the edge? Mm-hmm. Is it the device or is it the base station that's going to collect it? I do see investment in the base stations, in the micro data centers, because that physics of 1 millisecond round trip that he outlined, it's tough to change that. You either are there or you're not there. And if you're going to serve in 1 millisecond or microsecond, you need to be across the street. You can't even be across town. So if you're not investing in cell towers then or roof shots, I don't know how you get there.
So lots of drivers driving what's occurring here in the edge space. Smart cities was mentioned earlier, and that really brings that cell tower, the carrier, and all that backhaul network into play. We as Anixter are serving so many different verticals, whether it be healthcare, whether it be even higher education, smart buildings, all these things driving the change. What do you see with a lot of your customers and trending towards where this is coming from?
We do see smart city. We're in Singapore, and Singapore is one of the most advanced countries in terms of this. We do see connected car and connected fleet happening around the world. But my favorite use case is about something that all of us hopefully can love is bacon. Seriously. Smithfield is a client, and Matthew Douglas is their lead IT guy. And he was sharing with me that this factory warehouse retail is their business. And so in the factory automation piece, I imagine he was sharing with me they have facial recognition for pigs as they, swear to God, as they move from one place to another place for processing. The little ear tags that they use, which was also IoT, would pigs bump into each other and they fall off and they lose track of them. So they literally have an edge facial recognition algorithm for Larry the pig going to step 1, 2, 3 through the processing. And then from factory to packaging, they actually land the product in distribution centers that interact with the retail outlets. Mm-hmm. Retail centers place orders through systems. So in each one of these factory, warehouse, retail, there's a little bit of an edge sub-use case. But when you think of edge now, think of pigs and bacon. The happy face of a pig.
Very interesting use case there.
Yeah. Smithfield, actually Matthew's done some nice authorship, so if you look up Matthew Douglas, there's some good stuff out there on it.
Excellent. As Anixter breaks down its data center solutions, we look at managing risk, we look at the performance of the network and how it's migrated. Power and cooling is obviously critical, and how you manage that space and ultimately deploy it. From the context of two areas I think we wanted to focus on for this particular session was around security and the connectivity at the edge. How does it differ? How does it change when I'm in a beyond cell tower space versus upstream?
Well, the colo world of security and connectivity, the physical security and the environmental uptime is table stakes for us. We have to over-engineer to ensure we don't have any downtime, and we can hit these 7 nines SLA we hit on a basis of over 200 data centers. So the physical security of getting into the building and having access rights and ensuring you can block security for a contractor who may be off the contract in 10 minutes is just what we have to do. The connectivity piece, and I think Todd talked about the use case, if you have an application that requires a certain amount of latency and you know that the end user is sitting in a general region connecting to a front end, the network is the foundation for how that happens. And so co-location facilities, that center circle of the 3 that we were showing before, become an aggregation point, a logical aggregation point for where you can bring traffic in and make a decision of where you connect and who you connect to. And more, if the cloud edge is extended into those same facilities, and the network edge is there, you now have microsecond delay between collecting the information, shipping the information, processing it between the platforms like we mentioned Amazon and Google and Microsoft and all the hyperscalers. That connectivity becomes a driver for new use cases, not just web apps, but actual transactional databases talking to web front end, or IoT devices talking to sensors, talking to data, talking to algorithmic platforms. That network connectivity is critical.
So latency was mentioned earlier. You mentioned millisecond delay.
Yeah.
Like this just had a millisecond delay. So in terms of where you came from as an organization in that banking and finance aspect and driving that use case for latency there, and we talked about the bundling together of all these other edge devices driving a different need for latency. How's that looking? How are you preparing for that millisecond delay?
So our first ecosystem that helped build the company were the networks. When the networks came, this is in '98, networks came, banking and finance actually looked at where do we go to do high-frequency trading. And in Secaucus, New Jersey, not too far from here, there are multiple football fields long of data centers that have trading platforms, buy-side and sell-side traders that are working in microsecond delay inside the same building. Different companies trading with each other. And it's hundreds of millions of dollars per microsecond that get traded. So that was our first real experience with latency. Surprisingly, finance is highly regulated, so you wouldn't think they would be the first adopter of cloud, so taking systems to extend into public cloud. But one of our fastest growing cross industry, we measure cross connects. This cage goes into that destination. Banking and finance is actually connecting and scaling into public cloud at a rapid pace because they can get the performance and they can secure it and they can meet auditor requirements now in this hybrid architecture. Similar with healthcare, where you've got to have, there's certain use cases in healthcare, you've got to have a tight control of the information, patient records, for example, but you want to be able to do things with data or with an image, with a radiology image, that a hyperscaler is perfect for, where you can do rendering in a matter of seconds and bring that image back down. Cloud latency, speed kills if you don't have it. And so by being able to take your data and move it to the cloud edge, you actually can reduce the latency and make it actually run properly. That's where we are right now. The micro data center at the cell tower is the next step. And I think the references to 5G are also critical. I don't see a lot of 5G deployed pervasively, so we're looking at it and researching. But in the meantime, this interconnection between wireless landing, terrestrial landing, aggregating, and low latency into cloud is really where we're spending our time.
So you mentioned hybrid architecture and now just the interconnection. So with that interconnection and the importance of designing the space to cater for this new internet, what do we need to look at? What are the best practices there?
Well, I think you should be using the same best practices you've always used. If you want to replicate the same design that you're doing on-prem and do it in a colo facility or a third-party facility, you can now. A few years ago, it was a little more, this is our box, you have to fit into it. Now we're actually able to actually work with Anixter and customers and say, okay, I want this type of density with this specific equipment, with this PDU design and X number of cameras, and do a custom build and do it at the edge, do it at the cloud edge. So first thing is you can, which is great. That really wasn't as easy to do a few years ago. And then I think what was mentioned earlier is have a plan. Lay out your strategy of what the architecture is going to be. It may be that one node that has, in one city, that has diversity inside the cage isn't enough. You may need to actually extend and have multiple sites. But the run book of what you deploy and how you deploy it is easier and easier now to say, I want this in Silicon Valley, this in Chicago, this in DC, this in Singapore, and to be able to execute in a consistent manner. Okay. So that's, as you're thinking through the new edge architectures, that's hopefully good news for people.
Use plan, absolutely. We did a good job of deleting half a dozen slides here at the beginning to catch up some time. So just in summary, and we can open up for some questions. I'm sure there's some in the room, but whether it's at the enterprise data center, the multi-tenant space, or in an edge environment, the same best practices do apply around for managing risk, and whether that's logical or physical security, the performance and migration of the network, et cetera. So last comments from yourself as it relates to deployment of edge solutions?
We expect it will continue to evolve. Equinix is investing, I'm just trying to be careful to say colo. All colo providers have this, but Equinix is investing in technology research on what is that next wave of thing, whether it's IoT as a broad category or specifically micro data centers to solve a specific use case. And so we're expecting it to evolve. I think everybody here should expect it to evolve. Make sure you're laying out and picking your partners that have not just today's vision to execute, but that longer term vision that kind of future-proofs your infrastructure as you go forward.
Excellent. So to wrap up, hands going up at the back, we've got an opportunity to put some questions to Greg.
So I'd be curious, moving past the cell tower piece, where do you think the impacts are from things you guys are doing with, say, Megaport. You're looking at, software-defined layer 3 as a way of changing the transports. It seems it's still a little nascent, I think, but I'm really curious of where you think that's going. You guys clearly aren't doing that just for giggles, so I'd just be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, we believe in it so much, we actually built our own platform. It's called Equinix Cloud Fabric. It is a physical switch with API interface that's SDN-driven that allows companies to come in and buy a port in a city, API into us, and connect to multiple digital destinations. So think the cloud providers, think software providers, Salesforce, ServiceNow, others. And then also take networks out of that city and provision networks from, say, New York to Chicago or New York to Atlanta. That's live. We have that available now where you can buy a port here in Secaucus and connect to Chicago off of that SDN fabric. And off the back end of that, you'll be able to then choose your carrier. If you want to choose an AT&T or Verizon, as long as they play and connect, you can choose them as a destination. So we believe in it, and there are other companies that built their services, like you mentioned Megaport, in our facilities, because that's where you can peer with the networks, and that's where the clouds are. So that efficiency point is our building, which is great, but we believe in it enough that we've launched in 30 cities around the world today, and it's available.
So you said that Equinix is always evolving. So my question is, what is Equinix doing, or what is the strategy for the edge at Equinix?
It's a mix of things. So what is the strategy for the edge? We build, run, and operate physical data centers that have networks and cloud edges inside them as a premise, as a business model, not a premise. And we do it in multiple cities. It's 200 locations around the world. So like in Australia, we'll take your home market there. We used to have only operations in Sydney and Melbourne, which is where all the network and cloud aggregation points were. We just purchased a company named Metronode that takes us across the rest of Australia. And so rather than having to backhaul everything to the eastern part of Australia, we now have data centers that can collect information locally and then make decisions. The end user and service providers can make decisions on where to ship that data. That type of investment is happening around the world. We bought companies in Spain, bought companies through the rest of Europe. So that's one, real estate purchases of data centers with networks around the world. And then the rest is around technology development. Our strategic initiatives teams are looking at things like SDN and NFV, and Ericsson was referenced earlier. They actually launched an NFV as a service offer inside of Equinix around the world. It's like 30 different locations where they are providing for their customers the ability to spin up ports and interconnect networks on the fly inside of our buildings. So there's technology development. And then last is really getting to the use case. So we have experts that do IoT and specifically connected car now and connected fleet because it probably has the best ROI. It's easy to explain why if you measure the data off of a fleet of trucks that you can get your parts suppliers ready and not have to wait and not have your trucks in maintenance windows. So we're investing in the knowledge necessary to be in front of what that next wave of technology is. So that's the mix. A little bit of real estate, a little bit of technology, a little bit of business smarts.
So you're investing in facial recognition of sheep down under?
Well, I know how important that is to Australia and New Zealand. Yes.
Any other questions?
Sir.
One of the values at least I've had so far is the value of edge is given all the amount of data we anticipate. And some organizations are making strategic plans with that assumption. What if I told you that there's some organization that's figuring out how to reduce the amount of data such that the curve we saw that was exponential, in the next couple of years, the amount of data we're talking about, since perhaps let's say it's a different file type, it plummets. Does that impact your edge strategy?
No, it's similar. So the question, if you couldn't hear it, was if data sets are smaller going forward, the data may increase, the amount of data that's produced may increase, but the compression of the data, the size of the data sets actually don't increase exponentially because of technology and better compression methods. That actually happened already, where if you think about old servers and storage and moving to high density and converged systems, everybody was like, Equinix, are you colo providers going to suffer because they don't need to buy stuff that's a mile wide? They're only going to go a mile deep inside of a highly dense cabinet. That didn't hurt us. We're still the interconnection point for where data flows. And so we, at least in our world, believe that will be the place where data lands, however big it is, stored, and then interconnect with the cloud platforms or digital platforms that live. And so it may change power density requirements. We may end up saying, okay, our 6 kVA design that can scale to 15, where we have companies coming in now with Oracle Exadata database platforms that weigh too much for a raised floor. We like those because we have concrete floors. With massive power densities, we may have to rethink the environmentals, which our partners will help us ensure we can supply. But I'm not. I still think the amount of data that's going to be produced is still going to keep us in business for a long time.
Thank you.
All right, folks, big hand for Greg and